Willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, zum Open Forum. Schön, dass Sie so zahlreich.
Welcome to the Open Forum. I am very happy to see that you have thronged here in such great numbers, and we are looking forward to this very exciting discussion tonight for 1.5 hours, which is on the subject of has the West failed in Afghanistan. I'm going to give you a few keywords. Billions thrown out of the window, the great leap backward. The Far Eastern Economic Review had this as a headline, or Talibanization is marching on, the title in the Courrier International. These are chosen arbitrarily, but it shows how much optimism and euphoria is connected with Afghanistan, or rather the contrary. It's now the 10th year that the ISAF should have made sure that there was security and safety and peace. A lot of money has flowed into Afghanistan, but warfare is still very bloody. About 10,000 people have died in the last 12 months, and 6,000 very bloody incidents have taken place. So 10 years after the fall of the Taliban, the situation is not much better yet at the Hinder. And now, with some force, change has to be made before Obama presents himself to the next elections and will want to withdraw from Afghanistan. We have Sakina Jacobi, who studied in the US and then returned to Afghanistan, where she set up the Afghan Institute of Learning, which is mainly devoted to women. She's responsible for mobile clinics and hospitals, and what's really noteworthy, Professor Jacobi has been able to maintain this even during the reign of the Taliban, when primary schools were still open, and which of course was very dangerous. Then to my right we have someone from the world of politics, Mr. Sikorski, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland. He used to be Minister of Defense. He studied in England, not in the US, but had a career in Washington, and even was in Afghanistan as a journalist during the war when Russia, the Soviet Union, was involved, and he has as a responsibility to withdraw the Polish forces by 2012 from Afghanistan. Then to my left we have Mr. Karga. But before I introduce you, I have to say who should have been here in this seat. We should have had Fahrad Darya, who is a superstar in that part of the world. He's a rock star, a pop singer. He's called the Afghan Elvis, but he's not just a singer, he's also a human activist, but unfortunately his flight was cancelled because of poor weather in Washington. But his manager has fortunately been able to take his place. He's known Fahrad for many years. He's worked with him for more than 10 years. And Karga himself is someone with an independent voice in Afghanistan. He has taken very brave stands, and together with Fahrad Darya they created Koshar, which is an organization that looks after street children and widows. And he has very good contacts with the president, Mr. Karzai. We'll talk about that later on. Then we have Martine van Bijlert, a former Dutch diplomat. Half of the year she spends in Afghanistan. She's co-director of the Afghanistan Analysts network, which is an alliance of independent analysts and observers. She makes sure that all these analyses are made available to the public, also on the internet. And then right on the left we have Ulrich Tilgner. He's been reporting for more than 30 years about the Middle East and the Far East. He works for the radio, the printed media, has written several books, for example, The Staged War, and he is a colleague of mine. He's a correspondent at Swiss television. Now, we'd like to speak about three main topics. First of all, an analysis. Has the West really failed, or has there been any progress? Secondly, What makes it so difficult to do anything in Afghanistan? Why is it a war that simply does not seem possible to win? And before we open the discussion to the floor, what is supposed to happen in the next few months when the forces, the troops, wish to withdraw or will actually withdraw from Afghanistan? I'd like to quote a journalist who said that every soldier who dies in Afghanistan dies to preserve the status quo. That is to say, that no progress is made. Do you agree with this analysis, Martine van Bijlert?
I don't think I do. I don't think you could say that over the last 10 years what has happened in Afghanistan is that the status quo has been kept in place. What we actually see is that great changes have taken place. We had the Taliban regime until 2001. They were kicked out. We then had a period of very high expectations. Almost euphoria. I remember being in Kabul at that time, and there was a sense that almost anything was possible. And over that, we've seen a very steady decline. And so there hasn't been a status quo. It was bad, there was this huge hope, and then it just got worse and worse. Instead of having a period of steady build-up and reconstruction, we actually had a period of steady decline and of people losing hope. So on the question, did the West fail in Afghanistan? They certainly failed to live up to their own ambitions. They certainly failed to live up to the expectations of the people. They probably failed in doing better. They could have done better and didn't. Now we'll need to see, in the coming period, will they fail in trying to sort of cobble it together, make something that could hold together.
Martine van Bijlert hat es angedeutet.
Yes, she's just touched upon this. Many promises were made. And if you take stock, well, you can't say that there's been a high degree of security and peace. We want to have economic development. The situation of the Afghan population hasn't really improved very much. Democracy, well, here too, a lot still has to be made. Do you think we are really painting this too black, or how do you see it, Mr. Tilgner? Well, Afghanistan is in a very open situation. On the one hand, you have the Western states that are active there and are making means available which are unimaginable. The largest item in the American defense budget is now the training of Afghan soldiers, and that costs the American taxpayer $20 billion a year. That's more than is being spent on battle troops and the carriers. That's 20 times as much as what Afghanistan as a state could even have on its incoming side of the balance sheet. So if all this expenditure is for nothing, well, then we can only talk about a gigantic misdevelopment. You're saying if, Mr. Tilgner, yes. Well, it's very difficult to say what's going to happen. 10 days ago, I spoke with the press representative of ISAF, and he said that the average lifespan of such a commander is 4 months. So every 4 months, a commander of the Taliban is killed. That's what the German ambassador also said. So the question is, for how long will the Taliban be able to recruit such commanders and soldiers and put them in the field? If they manage to do so for another 2 years, it's fine. Then they'd be in good position. If they only manage for another year, well, then they may have to give in. All these are very difficult questions to answer. So the overall trend seems to indicate, according to what the American generals and the politicians are saying, that you cannot win this war in military terms. And despite these gigantic inputs from the West, and one has to assume that Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries of the world, and this is where there's the greatest military intervention in financial terms. And it's possible that these foreign forces will fail. And even if they were to win, who will have paid the price for it? Well, it's the Afghans. I would assume that maybe there will be a military victory, but at what price? The whole Afghan society is decaying, and there's going to be a split between the urban and the rural regions. In Kabul, people are better off, but there are 50,000 villages that have no great future, no great outlook. And in spite of 60 years of development work, nothing has changed there. So 60 times more is being spent on Afghanistan than the Afghan state actually has in terms of income. Even if the military forces are withdrawn, it will have been a failure, even if it is then reported as a military victory. Okay, this is not something that you hear gladly, Mr. Sikorski. Are you ill at ease when you hear these analyses, when one hears that one has to assume that there will be a military failure and not a victory?
I agree that this is becoming a war that we can't afford. But I believe we should cast our minds further back to the origins of where Afghanistan is today, to the communist coup and the Soviet assistance to the communist regime, because it's then that the Afghan social fabric and infrastructure was destroyed. And the Taliban regime was the regime that took over after the political vacuum was created in the wake of the Soviet defeat. By the way, I haven't seen this figure of 10,000 people killed in the last 12 months. The highest figure I've seen is about 2,500, which is bad enough. But let's remember that during the war with the Soviet Union, about 1.2 million people were killed in one decade. In other words, that in those days, about 100,000 people were being killed per year. And this is important. It's real lives. And it's true we haven't achieved everything we want, but I've been going to Afghanistan for 25 years, for the first time in 1986. And I have to say that when I went to the Kabul conference last year, this is the most prosperous I have seen Afghanistan. The country is economically booming. There are problems with security, there are problems with governance, but many Afghans are doing much better for themselves than they ever have been in living memory.
In Kabul?
And that's, no, not just in Kabul. In the city of Herat, where I was in 1987, it was known at that time as Little Hiroshima, because it was literally a sea of ruins. Today, it is a flourishing city. But I agree with you that as the West, we should be modest about what we can achieve, and we should also remember that we are guests there. We can't lose Afghanistan because Afghanistan is not ours. We can only help the Afghans. And so while they want us there, we're still there. And by the way, Poland is committed to staying there till 2014. This is what we decided, together with the rest of NATO, in Kabul last year. And by 2014, we will have been there for 13 years. If something cannot be done in 13 years, it probably can't be done.
So you're truly still optimistic about this?
What I'm saying is we have sent a very clear message to the Afghan authorities that in 3 years' time, they will be on their own. So they really need to get their act together. Because remember, the success or failure is mainly as a result of what the Afghans do, not of what we do.
Auf das kommen wir gleich zu sprechen.
Yes, we'll come back to that right away.
In a few minutes, I would like to emphasize on one point. Einen Punkt möchte ich rausnehmen und
Just want to underline one thing. So much seems to be better than in the past. That is one statement. I know that you, Mr. Karga, would very much like to fight poverty, and you are very concerned about this, as Fahrad is. Do you agree with Mr. Sikorski that things have really improved, that the cities are flourishing, that it's never been as good as in the past? Well, we cannot forget that Afghanistan was at war when ISAF arrived in Afghanistan. There was a lot of mistakes were made. There were interventions that hit the wrong targets. and there was a lot of warfare with the Taliban, and they were very inexperienced. They simply did not listen to what the Afghan government was saying, but in the meantime, ISAF now listens to the Afghan government, and there is agreement between the two sides. Nor may we forget that because of ISAF, Afghanistan has actually become a country in which there's now a parliament, we have democracy, and by cooperating with Karzai's government, which is constantly being criticized, because a lot of people simply don't know what Karzai has actually managed to do in the past. One may not forget this. Karzai looks like an animal that is trying to make its way through the forests where lots of wolves are trying to attack it and kill it. Yes, but my question is, are the Afghans happy? Well, let me come back to that. The population itself was neglected. A lot of attention was only given to the military, to the soldiers, and not sufficient measures were taken to protect the civilian population. But now, slowly, we're getting there. The slogan is first Afghan. First focus has to be on Afghans. Contracts are concluded with Afghans, and we're trying to get Afghans on board. I think that ISAF has really helped a lot because we now have a democratic government. It's being governed democratically. Anyone can speak out against the government without being arrested, without being persecuted. You can go up to a Karzai and say, I don't like you, you're not doing this well, or you're not doing that well, and he'll smile and he'll try and remedy the situation. I think we do have a president who's been able to prove that he has a lot of patience, he's very tolerant, and is applying a lot of tolerance in all his doings, even though he's being criticized a lot in the West. I'm very independent, and I'm not supporting Karzai. I criticize him as well. But we really have to admit that he has done a lot, and also thanks to the support of ISAF. That's what I can say. Well, thank you very much. I'll give the floor to Professor Jacobi in a while. Mrs. Bijlert, Mr. Tilgner, you don't seem to be in agreement with what has been said just now. I think the situation of Afghanistan is well reported in UN reports. For many years, life expectancy of Afghans was declining. Afghanistan had one of the lowest life expectancies in the world, and after 8 years of Western aid, this life expectancy has further declined. Yes, Herat and Kabul are flourishing. I remember very well when the Taliban were falling or fell, land prices rose by 2 within 1 hour in Herat. But 100 kilometers away from Herat, you have the most terrible poverty, and you have warlords reigning, and there's very little of democracy there. If you go to Badakhshan, you will find that infant and child mortality is the highest there in the world. And there are hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent on Afghanistan. In WikiLeaks, you were able to see that the deputy prime minister was caught in Dubai with thousands of dollars in his pocket, and he was arrested. Yes. it's true that he was not arrested in Afghanistan, says Mr. Karga. Well, what you're saying is that there's still a need for a lot of action, and the Afghans themselves have to improve the situation. Can I give the floor now first to Professor Jacobi? Could you give us your view on the situation? Do you feel that the West has failed in Afghanistan, or would you say that there has been progress, and I'm very happy to say that the situation is as it is?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to talk to you on behalf of the Afghan women and children. If you remember, during the Soviet Union, millions of Afghan people have been killed. 7 million have been refugees to Pakistan. 3 million have been refugees in Iran. And it's 30 years that Afghan society, civil society, is losing life. For 30 years, constantly there is a war in our country. But the country completely demolished. There wasn't anything left in Afghanistan. People lost their children, their father, their husband, their mother. People were devastated. In a country that has been 30 years of war and everything demolished, I want to share with you some news today. I have been working in Afghanistan right now for 20 years. During that Russian invasion in Pakistan, in Peshawar, in the refugee camp, during the Taliban underground, and now in Afghanistan openly. But I would like to share with you good news. Yes, there is a lot of bad news. You hear lots of bad news. You hear that we lost soldiers. You hear that the West is failure. Yes, there is a lot of bad news. But I want to share with you the good news. The good news is that the women of Afghanistan are blooming. They are fantastic. They are learning. They are going to school. 7 million children are going to school. Do we have a school for 14 million? No, we don't have it. But 7 million are going to school. Women of Afghanistan today are holding job. They are going as a teacher, as a doctor, as a lawyer. I have students who during the Taliban were underground. Today they are in law school. Today they are in medical school. Yes, we do have all those things. For us as an Afghan woman, I want to tell you that Afghanistan has been devastated, but we have been promised over and over and over that they are going to stay beside us. They are going to help us. Today, the Afghan women and children need help. It's the time that we come to rise to up. We are rising up. We are asking, we are answering questions. We are doing critical thinking. We are saying what's our right. We are getting to the parliament. We are going to the political arena. But right now, if you leave us, what will happen? We will be completely crucified. Bloodshed will be all over Afghanistan. Why don't you give us some time? Why don't you give us some time that we built our capacity? A country that has been devastated for 30 years. It is going to, overnight, going to be complete? No.
Ms. Jacobi, so you're saying from this point of view the situation has clearly improved, but then we see that, the foreign troops, they get exhausted because the war costs so much money. What makes it so difficult for the troops to succeed? What is the main problem they have to tackle?
I would like to really give me some time. Please give me some time, okay? I really
have
want
lots
this
of time left,
yes.
Don't worry.
The problem is that, yes, the troop is being killed. 30,000 people in one day in Herat was killed. Who talk about those people? Aren't we all human beings? Yes, I am very sorry for the NATO ally to be killed, but our people are being killed. You know that if you do not get to the root of the problem, that problem that we have today is not Afghanistan problem, it's the world problem, it's global problem. Why don't we think that way? The civil society is helping. The reason that right now the people of Afghanistan is so much in trouble because poverty is taking over. Do you know that right now people don't have a piece of bread and a glass of tea to eat? Poverty is all over Afghanistan. People have no job. We don't have electricity. We don't have shelter. We don't have a school. For 10 years, yes, the troop has been there. But I hope the strategic plan is changing. I hope that you provide some infrastructure for the civil society. Right now, civil society is taking part by themselves. Do you know so much improvement have been taken? Why? because the civil society work through community to community. I am working in area of education for 20 years. I am working in rural area. I am working in 7 provinces of Afghanistan. Yes, I would like to go to 33 provinces of Afghanistan. Security is not allowing me. I work with 480 women who are my personnel, who are working with me.
Ms. Jacobi, let's address your issues with the panelists here, because this is one important point that you make. Mr. Sikorski, you heard what Ms. Jacobi said. The international troops, they tried to combine military action with civil action. You know, they tried to build fountains, build streets, build schools. Was it not enough in order to win the hearts of the people, or what did make it so difficult in order to succeed?
Well, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was not founded for transforming countries. It was founded as a defensive alliance to defend the territory of its members, and it is not equipped for this particular job, and I think there are lessons to be drawn. But I think we should remember that our interests in Afghanistan are quite limited. We went into Afghanistan to remove the Taliban from power because there was an attack on a NATO ally, the United States, that was directed from Afghanistan. So our interest, first of all, is negative in the sense that we want to deny the territory of Afghanistan to the bad guys. That's our minimal interest. Then, in addition, I would define success as being able to withdraw while handing over responsibility for the security of Afghanistan to a more or less legitimate and more or less democratic government. And it's not fair to say that things are bad in Badakhshan. Badakhshan is a lovely place. It looks like Switzerland, but it is not Switzerland and will not be for many years. And it's always been very, very poor. Things are much better than they used to be. For television journalists, 11 years ago, television sets were banned. The Taliban used to string up television sets from lampposts. Today, you have a very lively media in Afghanistan, 24 independent television stations. So things really are much better. But I believe that we will be able to afford a more generous assistance to Afghanistan once we start reducing our military presence. Because it is very expensive to have troops there.
Aber ist das überhaupt möglich?
But is it at all possible? Robespierre said during the French Revolution that no one likes armed missionaries. Is that perhaps the basic problem, that one tried to combine the military with the missionary work?
Robespierre is not a guiding force, at least for the British government.
Hopefully
not. But the logic of using the military was a correct one, namely that you need basic physical security for developmental people to be able to go in and help at all. But I believe that as we are building up the Afghan army, it's the Afghan army that has to fulfill that job. And what we need to do is to help the Afghan authorities to pay for that army. Because the problem is that to have a secure Afghanistan, you need an army of 300,000 to 400,000 people. And they don't have the resources to pay for it. Afghanistan is not Iraq. Doesn't have the oil, doesn't have the gas. So I think it will be cheaper and more effective to pay the Afghans to take care of their own security.
Können wir über diese afghanische Armee schnell sprechen?
Could we say something about the Afghan army? Martine van Bijlert, we hear again and again that this army, which at the end of the day will have to assume the responsibility for security in Afghanistan, is not doing very well, that the units are not being trained well enough. Most of them can't even read or write, most of these soldiers. So there's a lot of work that's still has to be done until this army is brought up to speed. How do you analyze the situation?
Yeah, that is an issue, and it's part of a larger problem. And so if you allow me, I'll take a few steps back while answering your question, partly because I'm actually not yet quite happy with the picture we've made about what's going on in Afghanistan and what the situation is in Afghanistan. I think what we have in Afghanistan, we were saying my friend here said before, in the beginning, ISAF didn't listen to the government very well, but that's getting much better now. They're listening to the government. Afghanistan has a democracy. We hear it's the most prosperous that it's ever been. If you speak to Afghans, that is actually not what you will hear from them. That is not the story that they tell you. Part of it is because of the very high expectations. But part of it is true concerns and true dissatisfaction. And one of the main ones is that they say, if this is democracy, then actually we're not that interested. This is not really working for us. I think part of that is the misunderstanding that if you've brought elections, you've brought democracy, which we've seen again and again in the country that is not the case. And particularly after 30 years of war, what you have is a powerful network that have often come to power because they were the most violent or the most clever. And that is what we've seen in Afghanistan as well. The people that came to the front as the Taliban collapsed and as a government was being built were largely the pre-Taliban commander networks and some other people that came up during the war and that are often not exactly the people that you might want to have in government. Those are also the people who can manipulate elections, who can take over ministries, who can take over an army apparatus, who can infiltrate the police. And so that is what you have in Afghanistan, that increasingly we've built the institutions. They look like institutions, but they're often very factionalized. And that is one of the problems of the army as well. It's not so easy to change. It's not so easy to change in a few years. It's particularly not so easy to change while you're fighting a war. And that's
why is it so difficult to change? What role does ethnicity play in this issue?
Ethnicity plays a role. I think there's one step back. What plays a role is that we're trying to do different things at the same time. On one hand, we're trying to build institutions, which takes a certain caliber of people. On the other hand, trying to fight a war takes a different caliber of people. And what you saw, particularly in the early years on the war, when the US military were waging a war on terror, they would link themselves to quite violent commanders because they were very good at fighting. And so a lot of the conflicts that you have now, it's between ethnic groups, but more often on a lower level between tribes and sub-tribes, stem from that time when a commander would tell the military, you want to know where the Taliban are? They live over there. That happened to be his neighbor with whom he had a conflict over land, was not Taliban often. And so that's where the root of a lot of the conflicts came from. What we see now, as the situation is getting more and more insecure, and as people are feeling more and more insecure as well, ethnic suspicions are growing. And this is something that we've seen very much over the last years, and I would say particularly over the last year. When people start being afraid that things might spiral out of control, they start getting together, they start becoming more worried that another group becomes more powerful than them. And that is what you do see now, a consolidation of trying to consolidate positions in case it goes wrong.
Ich möchte einen Punkt herausgreifen, bevor wir noch einmal über die afghanische...
Now, one further point before we talk about the Afghan Army. You said that they look like institutions, but they're not actually institutions. What I'm interested in, Kaka, is that in Afghanistan the family has played a big role for cohesion. But there doesn't seem to be a great deal of trust in state institutions, because for a long time the state simply wasn't present. Do you think that it's going to take time for people to come to terms with what the state can be, and that for them the family is a lot more important? Well, it begins with the family and ends with the tribe. Family and tribe in Afghanistan has always been very important. And you can't forget one thing about Afghans and Afghanistan is that it takes a long time for them to believe in themselves. The artist Fahrad Darya couldn't imagine giving a concert, for example. It's simply impossible to imagine for these people that such a live concert could take place. They don't even know what a live concert looks like. After this concert, it was incredible to see how happy the people were. In Elman, for example, when there's a concert before 45,000 people, and that's a place where the Taliban are ruling. The English say you can't go to this place because you'd be a target. But the Taliban didn't stop it. They allowed it to happen. The Taliban are changing as well. They knew well that the ban on women and music really destroyed them. And slowly, perhaps, they're coming around to reason. They recognize that they belong to this country. That's something that you can't forget either. You asked about the family. The family has always played a big role. During the war, Afghans who lived in Europe, America, and the rest of the world always supported their families in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Well, but my question is that still part of the problem? Is it difficult to get to grips with this issue because ideas such as state and democracy are actually empty? Well, we mustn't forget that for 30 years the country was destroyed. The Russians attacked us. They didn't simply attack us, they destroyed us. It lasted for 30 years, and you cannot expect that in 10 years Afghanistan becomes the equivalent to Switzerland or Germany. We need at least 30 years, at least. Ulrich, Tilgner, it seems that Swiss families are so insecure. They send one to the army, one to the police, and one to the Taliban, and then they'll see who wins the war, and then at least they'll have a member of the family on the right side. Is that excessive, or how do you think this war could end? Well, I think, as I've already said, it's natural in the case of Afghan society to try and hedge your bets, to keep contact with all sides, because it's a very open situation. It's been said, on the one hand, things are going better, etc., etc., etc. On the other hand, people don't have bread, water, or electricity. Those are two things which exist in parallel, exist in Afghanistan side by side. And this incomprehensible situation has arisen, is observable after 10 years of Western intervention in Afghanistan. And I think you have to distinguish between what an Afghan says, which is we've managed this, that, and the other. It's cost the West $1.5 trillion. But you have to think, well, what has actually happened? Actually, nothing has happened, you could say. The Afghans will perhaps say, we need more, we need more, we need more. Now, of course, Afghans need more, but the question for Western politicians, for the Western military, has to be a very different one. What has been achieved with the enormous expenditure? What progress has been made in terms of liberty, democracy, social progress, and freedom? And I think if you sum everything up, then the total is almost zero. Now, that is a catastrophe. And the issue, which is central for our discussion here, is that NATO will not go in 2014. Obama said we're going, our withdrawal is beginning. But based on what I know, Western troops will remain in Afghanistan beyond 2014 because they are taking this country as a hostage. It needs to... We're talking about the withdrawal. We'll talk about the withdrawal of troops in a moment. Yes, I understand, but this is the context. At the moment, we're helping. We're continuing to help. We have Bagram, Kandahar, two other bases. The moderator. Well, what expectations do you have of the Afghans themselves? Answer. Well, the Afghans will expect more of the same. those who are sitting at the table in Afghanistan have become very rich. It's possible to earn money as never before in this country because of Western aid. Now, it's a rumor that the Taliban are financing the resistance through drugs. The resistance is being financed partly by protection money paid by the US and other countries. Drug profits go into the pockets of the people of the government in Kabul and then are invested in Dubai. That is the reality today. You've forgotten something. The neighbors in Afghanistan, Pakistan and Iran. Their governments speak a different language from their secret services. That's what we can't forget. Yes, what Mr. Karger is saying is central. Afghanistan is the plaything of its neighbors. Allow me to finish what I'm saying. We have to look at the sum total of what's been done. What's been done over the last 9 years, what has been the input, and what must the Afghan people pay in the future. Now, the Afghan elite is going to say we need more help because the conditions are unsustainable as before. The price will be paid, and the price will be that troops will remain there. And 2014 is not possible as a date for withdrawal. It's possible that the withdrawal will be to the fundamental bases in 2014, and positions will be built against Iran and Pakistan, etc. That's the situation, and it will be said in the future that it will be the fault of the Afghans, and the failure will be attributed to those who we wanted to help. Well, allow me to give others, Kini Yacobi, allow me to give you the floor and answer to what's been said.
I would like to make a few points here about Afghanistan. What's the situation right now? Is the soldiers should get out or not? First of all, I think that the population of Afghanistan, 60% are women in Afghanistan. In order for 60% to take a place in a political arena, which means in politics, so it means that we have to educate those 60%. They are not able to read and write. So first thing that we should pour money into education. If we educate the people of Afghanistan, they will speak for themselves. Nobody else has to speak for them. Nobody else has to fight for them. Right now, we believe that the key issue for Afghanistan to bring peace is education. If we educate the civil society, give them few more years, they will stand up on their own.
That means that also you're very much afraid of the troops leaving too soon.
Absolutely, we are afraid right now. If the troop leaves right now. You know why? I'm not an elite group. I'm from middle class family. I have been working with the poorest of the poor in the rural area. But I'm afraid for the women of Afghanistan. Because right now, even they are living in a village, they want to learn how to read and write. Because they want to stand for their right. They want to learn critical thinking. They want to say no. In order for them to say no, they must get education. In order for them to get education, we must give them chance. Please do not leave us alone the way you did before. We are not begging for money.
Ms. Yacobi, you are a role model for people, trying to improve the country situation by the force of civil society. But Ulrich Tilgner said that too many Afghan people, they just wait for external help. They wait for help and they don't do enough by themselves. Do you agree with this thesis or not?
Well, the problem is that the people of Afghanistan are poor. Majority of the people, about 95% of people of Afghanistan now poor. 5% has the wealth. So how you are not going to fight? The reason that you have the Taliban coming in, because the people have no choice. They run into them. I don't excuse them, but the problem is a big problem in Afghanistan. It's a big issue. It's not going to solve overnight, but education, health, infrastructure is very crucial, very important. As you yourself, if you don't have bread in your stomach, how are you going to learn? If you are sick, how are you going to go to school? That's the issue. This is the reality of life in Afghanistan. Yes, we have 5% of people, they have millions and billions. Yes, he is right. There are castles being built in Afghanistan. What I'm going to do with those? I want to bring education to the people of Afghanistan because I could see that the people love right now education. They understand what happened to the country. So
Radoslaw Sikorski, when you hear Ms. Jacobi talk, there's a lot of work being done until 2014. You said that if the mission fails, it's also because of mistakes that Afghan people make. What do you think has to be improved clearly in order to have a better...
Well, first of all, I hear two distinct views here. One view which says that Western presence has achieved nothing and is pernicious. Mm-hmm. And another view saying that
clear improvement.
Despite mistakes, they would like us to stay for a little while longer. Well, I'm with the Afghan view that that we should be there for a little while longer.
But you owe to us.
But it is...
You owe to us.
Well, no country owes anything to any other country.
Well, you know why? Because during the time that Russians were there and we were fighting Russia, you promised us that you are going to support us. As soon as we raised up, then you left, went to Iraq. And then right now, the Taliban are there, and then you are leaving us again.
But Mrs. Sikorski is on your side right now, for the moment.
and
the reality.
And as you know, the reason that Afghanistan didn't become peaceful after the Soviets left was a civil war among the Afghans themselves. So this is all very complicated. But the point is that this is an operation at the longest logistical lines that we've ever performed as the West. And in times of crisis, economic crisis in Europe, we are rebuilding a country literally in the middle of Asia. And our presence there is, at least for us in Poland, pretty exotic. As Poland, we have no national interests in Afghanistan whatsoever. Yet, we're there with 2,600 troops, with a developmental program. So I really object a little bit to the view that somehow we've taken Afghanistan as a hostage. Because we are there because the Afghan government wants us to be there. And I've been attending the Council of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization for 5 years. And I have never heard anybody speak there in those terms, that somehow we need to hold on to Afghanistan because of some strategic interest. I can assure you that we would like to leave Afghanistan as soon as is consistent with providing some basic stability. I can assure you that my public...
But is that realistic?
...to be in Afghanistan a day longer than is necessary.
Is it realistic when you say that by 2014 you want to withdraw the troops? I mean, given the situation there, do you think it's really going to be stable enough? Could you answer that?
Look, it's Asia. Afghanistan has important neighbors. Some neighbors that really do owe debts to Afghanistan. The Soviet Union destroyed Afghanistan's infrastructure, so I'm glad that Russia is making noises about trying to help rebuild it. Afghanistan borders on China. China is a rising power, has just been granted some very important mining concessions in Afghanistan that we, as Western troops, protect. There is Pakistan. Pakistan needs to sort out the tribal areas on its own territory. That's a major impediment to Afghan security. What I'm saying is that it's the regional powers that have to take over from us in stabilizing Afghanistan because they are much more involved. They have much bigger interests in a stable Afghanistan than we do.
Now, many of these states are playing both sides. The U.S. representative, Mr. Ulrich, said that 2011 will be the decisive year for Afghanistan. Mr. von Bijlert, do you believe that? What is going to happen now? No one's saying that the troops are going to be withdrawn immediately, but what is going to happen?
Yeah, well, for a very long time, every year has been the decisive year. And so this year is no different. We do have a difference now. I think what has happened over the last year, it's for the first time that there's been a consolidated thinking about what next. That the question has become very clear. We can't stay here forever. Our publics are not having it. The economy is pushing us. What shall we do? And I think that has been very useful to sort of get minds working on that. What we see now is that a clear strategy has come out of that. It's code-worded transition. It means handover and then leave. Intiqal in Dari. It says 2011 to 2014, and you're right. The pulling back of the troops in 2011 has been changed, saying we'll start in 2011, we'll end in 2014. The danger of this strategy now is that the what next runs until 2014 and not further than that. So it's getting ready for the internationals to leave, and then what? What kind of Afghanistan do you leave behind then? What kind of state have you built? If you spend these 3 years pumping in money so that you can achieve your numbers in police and army, who's going to pay for them after that? If you pump in technical assistance and money into the institutions so that they can do their jobs, what will happen after that? And what we really need now is to turn around this push towards the exit into some thinking about actually what kind of state should Afghanistan have after 2014. How can we help that?
Und wie soll das gehen?
And how is that going to work?
Yes, I mean, who shall be in charge of leading discussion in another direction?
Yeah.
Are you hopeful that this eventually will happen?
Which is a very complicated one, and I think that has been a complicated one in Afghanistan in general. Who's in charge? Who runs the show? In practice, it's the US, flanked by NATO and the UN, and the big interest at the moment now is honorable exit. I agree with my neighbor here, not full exit. I don't think that's the point. I think the point for all countries is they want to stop being politically vulnerable in Afghanistan. So if you stay in Afghanistan, but not in a way that your public really cares, that's okay. But at the moment, what happens in Afghanistan immediately reverberates in domestic politics, and that's very uncomfortable. So I think that's what they're really looking at. But I agree with my neighbor. I do think that there are interests, particularly on the side of the US, to stay longer after 2014, which do not have that much to do with Afghanistan. And you can feel the worry among Afghans is that all the plans that are being made about our country now are not really about us. They're about other actors. They're about the internationals. They're about our neighbors, not really about us. Who should change that? It's very difficult. The government, they're very much part of this whole parcel. The people, they're not sure how. Independent analysts, maybe.
But
it's not so
quite
easy.
a depressive analysis. Teilen Sie diese Ansicht?
Do you share that view that really there is no one who can run this show, who can take responsibility? No, I don't agree at all. I personally believe in the Afghan government at the moment. It's something that not everybody sees, but they're doing a lot of work. We've had 170,000 troops, which over the next 3 years we can use to move ourselves to a situation where we can protect our own country. Now, who's going to be deciding whether the Americans say, not them alone, we will decide with them, the world will decide with them. And the Americans are not coming in Afghanistan to protect us, they're protecting themselves. We are threatened by global terrorism. And unfortunately, that emerged from Afghanistan with the help of Iran, Pakistan, and Al-Qaeda. We have another problem, which is Pakistan and Iran. Because the opponents to our government are being supported by these countries. I think that what we should do, in my view, is take the fight outside of Afghanistan, take it to Peshawar or somewhere else. Why don't you go into politics? Well, I have already participated in politics. But you could be a voice which could help move something on. Well, what we're trying to do is to use arts, music and entertainment to move things slightly differently, to nurture freedom. I think we Afghans should begin to develop self-belief, and a performer such as Herbert Grönemeyer in Germany could change, an equivalent to Herbert Grönemeyer in Afghanistan could change a great deal. Well, I think that there seems to be agreement on one point. There's a lot to be done. There's a lot which is still vague. I would like to talk about that further with you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure that there'll be many questions which you would like to put to the panelists. So please raise your hands if you have a question, and we'll get the microphone to you. Please speak close to the microphone so that we can all hear your question. Hands up, please.
Sagen Sie mir nicht, dass alles beantwortet ist.
Please don't tell me that we've answered all your questions. I would be very disappointed. We do have one question here.
Yes, my name is Stefan Kleinsorger. I'm from Strasbourg in France, but I'm German, so I'm European. I would like to understand how the civil society acts in Afghanistan. Do the Afghan people pay taxes? Is there a legal system? Is there an independent judgment? If I invest in Afghanistan, can I be sure that my investment is safe? How is it?
Eine Frage.
One question, please. And who are you addressing?
Obi, please.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Your question is wonderful, but which country is going to guarantee this kind of question? No country can guarantee that kind. But I'll tell you, civil society in Afghanistan are really trying to defend themselves. They are going to be the one who is going to free Afghanistan, nobody else. Right now, our country is really in a critical point. The reason I'm saying it's in a critical point that we could not guarantee, because yes, law is not in order. They brought democracy, they say it's democracy, but it's not democracy as such. But people are trying to learn. But is it law in order right now? No. Do we have corruption? Yes. You know that. I don't have to tell you. Huh? But the problem
Als
is...
Investor
But the problem, our society is really holding very tight, and they are stick together, and they are the one who is going to be free Afghanistan. They need a few more years. I assure you, the few more years, the educational system is going to go there, and then people will take charge of their life.
Danke, Frau Jacobi.
Thank you, Professor Jacobi. Mr. Sikorski, would like to add something?
On a matter of fact, I believe there is no income tax in Afghanistan and no value-added tax. So in that sense, it's a right-wing heaven.
No, there is income tax.
Bitte schön, Ulrich Tilgner.
Mr. Tilgner? You have to make a distinction between taxes that are paid and the fiscal system is being improved, and corruption. That is, say, what a civil servant has to pay. There are studies that were conducted by the UN that have revealed that households, families, sometimes have to pay a tithe of up to 25% in terms of corruption. Normally, a product may cost $60, but the man in the street from the provinces outside Kabul or Herat would have to pay $300 or $400 for the same product. A governor has to pay money to the Ministry of Home Affairs in order to be appointed. There's a lot of corruption and a lot of money has to be paid under the table. So the Afghans don't only pay taxes but also bribes to bribe corrupt civil servants, and there's a system by which the money is then exported. It is put into banks outside Afghanistan. And the flights at the weekend are always full out of Afghanistan when the civil servants leave Afghanistan and spend the weekend in Dubai. And that is absolutely normal. And that is what really worries and angers the poor part of the population, because not only aid is being diverted to bribes and corruption, but also their own money. The U.S. has quite different strategic interests, and they may want to realize these interests. Perhaps Mr. Karger would like to burnish the image of his country listening to what you're just saying. Yes, well, if a ministry has 100 employees, and 10 or 15 of these employees, these civil servants, only earn $10,000 or $20,000 a month, and the others only earn $200 or $400 a month, and they are doing all the work. So this is a situation that is untenable. And of course, it's a terrible mistake. Some civil servants earn up to $20,000 a month, and then they're not doing anything except signing certain papers. And a person like that is, of course, corrupt, and this has to be combated in different way. Yes, of course, at the end of the day, this has to be combated, but it's no consolation for those who are going to reflect on whether they should invest or not in Afghanistan. And it's important to have a more stable situation and this requires investment. So how can we increase this stability for more economic development, Mrs. Bijlert?
Well, for development, you want a certain level of predictability, and that's exactly also what your question aims at. Is that quite a few of the Afghan businessmen that have come back because they wanted to invest in their country with all the best intentions are extremely frustrated after several years because they just spent so much of their time trying not to pay bribes, or they pay money paying bribes. And I think probably that unpredictability is worse. I was going to say probably that unpredictability is worse than the security, but actually anyone who is known as a businessman is terrified of their children being kidnapped. Criminality is very high. I have a friend of mine, he's the head of an ice cream factory. He always rides in old taxis. He just doesn't want to show the world that he has money. These are things that really make it difficult for a local businessman to invest. And a lot of them are holding on because they just want this to work for their country. But they don't know how long they will hold on.
And what would have to change exactly?
It's part of the larger things that have to change, not just for the investment climate, but just in general for Afghanistan's future. It's establishing the rule of law. I think that the most fundamental problem is if you have power, you can do whatever you want. You're above the law. And that is almost anything that you touch, that you want to build upon, or that's a problem, it comes back to that. It's something that the internationals could have more of a role because they are actually the main power in the country. And sometimes they do, but often they actually link themselves to some of the local people who are above the law and even form the protection, are the facilitators that allow them to do whatever they want. So it's, as with every answer, it's extremely complex.
Ich gebe gleich das Wort an Herrn Sikorski.
Give the floor to Mr. Sikorski in a minute. Are there any further questions? Yes, here on the right. You just wanted to respond rapidly, Mr. Sikorski, to the rule of law issue.
I think that's the core of the problem in Afghanistan, but also in some other places where normal state structures fail to deliver basic justice because of corruption, because of inefficiency. You have these anachronistic networks, these, for example, Sharia courts that provide very rough but very quick justice at the very low level, and sometimes people prefer that because it's the only thing there is. And another point I would make is that the international presence has a side effect which is not helpful to making the Afghan government stronger and more efficient. Namely, it's a good thing that thousands of NGOs have gone in to help Afghanistan. But they pay Western wages, and they often draw the best people away from Afghan institutions, and that means that the ones who are left working for the government are poorly paid and perhaps not the best and brightest. And I don't know what the solution is.
The best engineer is a driver and one NGO, for example.
Dankeschön. Frage hier von.
Thank you. A question here. I'd like to put a question to Mr. Tilgner. You have some very clear points of view based on your own observations and experience. Would you be able to publish all of this? Everything that you would like to say, could this all be published in written form? Do you think that we're actually getting the accurate information? Yes, of course it could be published, but the question is, how much time is there on television when I'm reporting from Afghanistan? I have about 90 seconds on camera. Don't look at me. Well, I get 90 seconds. And if the question is precise, then 90 seconds is a lot. If the question has nothing to do with the reality of the country, then, of course, 90 seconds is just enough to rectify the question. Well, that's very malicious, says the moderator. Well, I can give you examples, concrete examples. I know what I'm talking about. Well, let me give you an example. In Iraq, the Sunnites and the Shias, for the first time in 6 years, are agreeing to set up a government. Question to Mr. Tilgner. Everything is as always, nothing has changed. And I said, no, things have changed. It's not as in the past. But if I answer in that way, that doesn't help informing the public. Well, I cannot respond to that. I don't know the circumstances. Can you actually speak the truth? No, I'm not exaggerating, says Mr. Tilgner. You can say whatever you like and write whatever you like. That's not the problem. It's become very clear in this panel discussion that on the one hand we can achieve a lot, but on the other hand there is no bread, no food for the people. And I say the West has failed because if you look at the inputs and outputs, I'm not saying that nothing has improved or changed, but the gap between urban and rural areas is just becoming unbearable. The Taliban have gained ground in the rural areas. They were chased and now they're back. Simply because Western intervention is not working. You can say all of this. I use different arguments here than in Kabul. The world in Kabul is completely different. Poland sees the world differently from the United States. As a Polish foreign minister, I too would say I don't want to let the troops stay there. But when Hillary Clinton speaks, she would answer much more carefully and more indirectly. And when on the 16th of December Obama says, yes, we will withdraw, he first of all sends in more troops. And now there are 42,000 people need to be accommodated, and the bases are being expanded. And withdrawal seems to be far away. There are lots of questions, but not really the answers. Well, I should have had a representative of the U.S. government here on the panel. Mr. Sikorski, you would like to answer?
Just one point. I can assure you that all of us in NATO would be really grateful if Switzerland made a military contribution to Afghanistan and you showed us how to do it properly.
No.
Jetzt wird's ganz schwierig. Jetzt wird's ganz schwierig.
Well, that's going to become very delicate, Mr. Tilgner. Switzerland took a very important decision by withdrawing from Afghanistan, and the U.S. was very perturbed by this. But the Swiss said, we want to help in terms of development and development aid. When the Swiss soldiers were withdrawn after the decision of the Federal Council, the federal government of Switzerland, it was based on the decision that the conditions were not appropriate for their kind of cooperation. and the Red Cross took more or less the same decision. So one cannot reproach Switzerland. The Swiss Red Cross is doing absolutely wonderful work there, and it costs an awful lot of money. The Federal Republic of Germany, as one of the leading nations when building the police forces, has failed completely. Joschka Fischer made available 12 million in terms of budget, whereas the Swiss Red Cross came up with all the money for prostheses. Well, we don't have any representative of the Swiss government here on the panel, nor of the American government, so this question will not remain unanswered. I have a question here right at the back of the room.
Danke sehr.
Thank you. I'm a Swiss American.
I will put my question in English. My name is Edward Girardet, and I just wanted to make the point that it will take 30 years, really, for Afghanistan to reach a point where perhaps it has attained recovery. I think is a very good approach. But the question I have, we were talking about corruption, and we're constantly blaming the Afghans, I think quite rightly, particularly in the various ministries, various offices, for corruption. But we seem to forget that we have actually shown them how to be wonderfully corrupt in a much more extravagant manner by allowing a lot of companies to become involved in Afghanistan who really don't know what's going on, have no understanding at all. I think most of them tend to be American companies. Also the problem of the mercenaries, the so-called private security companies as well, building up this notion of you need security. And I'm just wondering, I mean, the latest figure I saw was $18 billion is now being investigated as having gone missing from U.S. contracts. So how can we talk about corruption with Afghans, which is correct, but why aren't we looking more closely at ourselves?
Who would you like to answer your question?
To anyone who would like.
Mr. Jacobi. Okay.
Yes. Thank you very, very much for this wonderful answer. I 100% agree with you. You know, everybody is blaming Afghan paying bribe, but we don't look the other side. Who is paying the bribe? Afghan could not afford to pay the bribe. For a logistic work that my organization is doing, we go day and day and day to just finish a very little paperwork, but we could not because we do not give bribe. We don't have the money to give bribe because the bribe in Afghanistan is not just a matter of $100, $200. It's a bribe of $1,000, $2,000, $10,000. Afghan could not afford that. So that's stop giving the bribe. Who is giving the bribe? Stop, not giving. If you stop giving bribe, the corruption will reduce. That's I really believe.
Frau von Bijlert, wie schätzen Sie diese
How do you assess this situation?
No, I think it's an excellent remark, and I think first of all it's useful to look at what we mean by corruption, because often when in the West we speak about corruption, we speak exactly about this petty corruption and corruption that's because of also poverty of the civil servants, whereas actually what's much more damaging is the high-level, massive corruption. A lot of it is in high-level government offices, and a lot of it is in international organizations. It's not called corruption because it's legal. So what you do is you get a contract, you take a cut because you've somehow handled it, and then you give it on to someone else. They take a cut because they've somehow handled it and give it on to someone else. It's not called corruption, but it's huge wastage. We then have all these organizations that have these enormous pushes to spend money. Many of you might know the term burn rate, which is particularly used with the US aid. If you do your job well, you have a high burn rate, which means you spend a lot of money. And it doesn't really matter what you spend it on. And that also explains why so much money has been spent, and it's really not clear what it was spent on. Because at that time when it was being spent, that was the most important thing, that it was spent. And that there was a paper trail, that you have papers saying what it was spent on. But it was very difficult to actually link it to something on the ground because it's been subcontracted so many times. Absolutely. Corruption, for years we've been banging Karzai on the head that he needed to clean up his government because it was corrupt. We've been saying Afghans were corrupt. The system is corrupt. And the system, for a very large part, is also includes the internationals, and just the big truckloads of money going in has corrupted the system. There's a small example. Well, it's not such a small example. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Defense did a joint contract which was called the Afghan Host Nation Trucking, and they made a contract with, I think it was 14 or 16 trucking companies, for $2.6 billion for a year to do the logistics for their military bases. That is much higher than the annual revenue of the Afghan government. It's impossible to spend that kind of money without wastage. And it's impossible to spend that kind of money without totally skewing the economic and political relations in a country. And yeah, that is something that we don't talk about often enough.
Danke, Frau von Bijlert.
Thank you, Ms. von Bijlert. Next question, please, at the front on the right.
I've got a question to you, Mr. Sikorski. How would you describe the psychology of the Taliban, of your enemy? And second, and what are their goals and motives in your view? And secondly, why is it so difficult for us to beat them?
Well, I think it's important to remember that not every Pashtun with a gun is a Talib. Some of these people were created as an opposition, armed opposition force. Some of them have real grievances. But I believe the main problem is that they have a supply of weaponry and are sustained from across the border. And we know that there is a vicious linkage between drugs and the revenue that they get from that, and also radical Islamic foundations in the Middle East that sustain them. And the reason that they can keep up their military strength is that they have sanctuary inside the tribal areas of Pakistan. Those areas have never in history been brought under regular government. They are still managed in the way that the British left it, very roughly. And the solution, a real long-term solution to Afghanistan would be to sort out the tribal areas. There was some hope in the last 2 years that the Pakistan government got sufficiently scared of the Pakistani Taliban, who took control of the Swat Valley, 100 kilometers from Islamabad, and they pushed back in Swat and I think in North Waziristan, and I think those areas should be brought under regular government control one by one. But
and the mindset, Mr. Sikorski, the mindset.
Well, the mindset, these are the Afghan year is. These are people who live literally in the Middle Ages. I mean, it's all very charming, in some ways, they live by a code of honor that we have almost forgotten in Europe. They can be quite nasty to their women, as you know. And the fact that women were not allowed to work or to be educated for 7 years, and that more women are now being educated in Afghanistan than ever in the history of that country, well, that's a change. So these are people who live by the mores of a very traditional rural Islamic society. They've always been extremely conservative. And it was only the Soviet invasion and the collapse of Afghan state that brought them to power in Kabul. But there are forces of modernization of Afghanistan too. As my colleague here was saying, millions of Afghans have now seen abroad, either as refugees or as people who have studied. And those are the people that we need to sustain so that they transform their country.
Mr. Sikorski, Ulrich Tilgner would like to add something. Ulrich, 90 Sekunden.
90 seconds. I only have one comment to make. The UN says $300 million from drugs money goes to the Taliban. The Taliban budget is much higher than that. There's a Senate committee, I'm at 60 seconds, which says that the main financing comes from the USA, and I think that it's negligent to say that the Taliban comes from drugs. $2.5 billion comes from elsewhere. The American money is going to the Taliban.
Yeah, just also quite briefly on the mindset of the Taliban. I think it's quite useful not to talk in caricatures too much, and also to say that there's not a single mindset of sort of a single standard Taliban. The point of the Taliban movement is that actually all kinds of groups and people are in there. Some of them are very ideological, some of them very conservative. Others are there for very clear grievances, basically because they've been pushed out of their areas and have come back to fight. Some of them criminal, some of them bored. There's a whole range, and it's quite useful to actually, when you're trying to encourage people to stop fighting, is to understand why they're fighting. And it's not just because they've always been conservative. There are actually real reasons that have a rationale.
Dankeschön, Frau von Bijlert.
Thank you very much. There was another question here at the front, in the middle, in the third row. Ms. Jacobi, you studied abroad, and in your country you have done an enormous amount, and that deserves enormous respect and praise. But I asked, you've asked for foreign troops to say. You said you need them, you need help, you need education, not least for democracy. What can troops do for education, I wonder? Would it not be more sensible if women are encouraged simply to follow your example? Mr. Sikorski echoed you, saying that students are coming home to their country after having studied abroad, and then that they can use their experience with their Afghan mentality to make enormous contributions to rebuilding the country.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think that the women of Afghanistan are courageous. They are bright, they are intelligent, and they need the environment. The environment be given to the Afghan women. I have seen this in 20 years. From the refugee camp, during the Taliban underground, and now in Afghanistan. If you give them the environment, they really will develop and they will be very successful. Because
so you're saying the troops are important to create the right environment?
The environment, very necessary. Security is the very important issue for Afghan women. Because right now, when they want to get outside their house, somebody blown up them in the ear. So they going outside, but they are very scared. Children are being kidnapped. Women are being thrown acid on their faces. Women are coming to work because they are dedicated to go to work. But otherwise, they are really scared. Security is not there. If security is given to Afghan women right now, they really will challenge the country completely. I tell you that much. And so, as a situation with me, yes, I was educated in abroad. I come back to Afghanistan, and right now, thousands and thousands of women are working with me. I have reached 7.7 million people in Afghanistan, educating them from a low level, from a literacy to a higher education. And I could see that they love to learn and they are improving.
Und was Sie auch sagen, Sie brauchen einfach.
And as you said, you need more time. You need more time, as you said, for that to grow further. We have one final question right at the back in the middle of the room.
Thank you.
Good evening. I have a question to Mr. Tilgner. You said that the West has failed in Afghanistan. That may be the case, but the objective is to find a solution for Afghanistan. what would a solution look like, and who can help Afghanistan if the West can't?
Ich finde es schön, dass ich auf diese Frage so antworten kann.
Well, I'm not for a very quick withdrawal. What I want is a rethinking. What I want is that the whole of the process is revisited, and we examine what were the causes of the failure, for the major corruption. What is the reason for farmers resorting to weapons? If you've seen Rambo 3, what is the reason for people fighting against the NATO troops in the same way that they fought against the Russians? These are the questions. And a major issue is the failure of civil assistance in the time from 2001 to 2005. At that time, Afghanistan was very peaceful, and it wasn't. There wasn't any success in that time at making the necessary changes. I don't think any individual can be made responsible for what's happened, but we need to find out what went wrong, and it's necessary also to maintain protection. But we need more education, but we can't say that we need to keep on educating soldiers so that they can protect the local farmers and ensure security. That's too far down the chain. What we need to do is ensure that we go upstream from that and ensure that we find the causes so that we avoid paying $20 billion, for example, for the training of police. Well, people don't even have bread and water. Something isn't working. It's not working. We need to take a step or two back. We need to speak with Afghans, not just those that we've installed ourselves and spend the weekends in Dubai. We need a whole rethink. Could you answer also very quickly before we conclude? Well, allow me to say what... please don't mention ISAF, otherwise Mr. Sikorski will have to come back and answer again, and we're running out of time. Well, let me talk about a religious celebration on 22 television channels. There was an individual who appeared congratulating or celebrating the religious event. Now, it could be imagined that this man, General Petraeus, was congratulating the Taliban. Now, if the broadcast is being made across 22 channels, it might be thought that this is propaganda for the Taliban. This is something that ISAF isn't aware of. Afghans might be thinking that their feelings aren't being taken into account. If their celebrations are being marked by the Taliban, but they're not being recognized by ISAF, then these misunderstandings will lead to terrible consequences. Well, allow me then to initiate the conclusion. We see that there are divergent opinions on the panel. Mrs. Van Bijlert, you said that you can only put an end to a war if you try and understand the other side. I would like to hear from all of you 2 or 3 sentences. Is there some kind of statement that you could make so that people can go home thinking, yes, that's given me food for thought? Can you give something? Can you give the audience something to take home with them? Well, I think it's extremely important, and I will try hard to understand the people who are resorting to arms. I think it's important that if we can understand that, then we can see the roots, the causes. This is something that I've understood from the statements of the colleague on my right. Ms. Bijlert.
It hasn't come up in this discussion, but it comes up in most discussions. The whole issue of the sort of the anti-war and the pro-war, and the argument that actually it's the presence of the military that is prolonging the war and possibly causing the war. And interestingly enough, that is an issue that is it's becoming more in Afghanistan now, as patience is wearing thin among the population, but it hasn't actually been the overriding theme. And in Afghanistan, a lot of the fighting was basically against the local representations of government, and only later and in the second place for the military. And what you see is a lot of the discussions here are local discussions, the difference between civil and military, the pro-war and the anti-war, which I think are very interesting and useful discussions, but they're often not the ones that are being played out in Afghanistan.
Herr Rumkaga, gibt es irgendetwas, was Sie sagen, nach dem nehme ich das mit nach Hause und überlege mir das vielleicht neu?
Do you have anything to say? Well, I think we need to build trust. And in 3 years, we will have a contribution to the decision as to whether ISAF will stay or not. I think I'm very optimistic. Our own forces, which we've created together with ISAF, will, I believe, be able to ensure security in the country, and we will be able to deal with the Taliban.
Afghanistan is a very rough, unforgiving place that lives by different rules than we do in Europe. The Soviets were often misunderstood what their experience meant in Afghanistan. Remember, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, withdrew from Afghanistan on the 15th of February 1989, yet a communist government remained in Afghanistan and only collapsed in March 1992. That proves that provided you supply a regime, and provided that regime is capable enough to sustain itself, Afghanistan can be governed without foreign military presence.
In addition to this, Mr. Sikorski, is there any statement that one of the panelists made tonight that you take home now and think about it a little more deeply?
Well, we can't. I agree that we, as our economic difficulties deepen, we cannot save every country in the world. We need to think more modestly about our role in the world, and that means we have to find a different solution for an alternative to our military presence in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Sakina Jacobi, which statement of the other panelists do you take home that will make you think a little more?
I really believe that Afghan people has the capacity to protect themselves and bring peace in Afghanistan, if giving them the space and giving them the environment. And I really believe that we are going to be succeed, because if we are going to think that we are going to be a failure, I will not be able to survive one day. So we struggle, yes, it's a hard life there, but the Afghan people decided that they are going to succeed. And why don't let the Afghan people make the decision for themselves, not the others?
Ein hoffnungsfrohes Schlussstatement.
Well, that's a very inspiring thought to end with. Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobi, Mr. Sikorski, from Bijlert, Mr. Tilgner, and all of you. Thank you very much indeed, and Mr. Kaga. Thank you very much indeed.